In this video, I'm going to be spending 100 days in Minecraft Pixelmon, but I can only use custom fusion Pokemon. Let's get into this. So, on day 1, I loaded into the SMASHMC server. I picked out my starter Squirtle, and as you can see, he's shiny. I then headed around and opened up a bunch of presents for the Christmas event, where I managed to open up a rare crate, a megastone crate, an aura crate, and even a 50-50 shiny crate. Unfortunately though, getting a shiny Pelipper didn't help me, as it didn't help to any of my fusions for the rest of this 100 days. I then headed through and opened up a bunch of lucky blocks as well, until eventually I got an Ultra Ball lucky block, where I got myself a Ho-Oh! There's no way! I actually just got a Ho-Oh! Oh my god! After that, I headed into the new boss tower, where I leveled up my Ho-Oh and got a bunch of boss drops. Eventually with that, I got myself an orb and a firestone, which I'd be able to use to get myself a Moltres later down the line. After that, I then headed over to the level grinder, as I wanted to evolve my starter Pokemon Squirtle all the way up into a Blastoise. I then headed out and went exploring on Ho-Oh until eventually I managed to find myself an Ultra Space Wormhole. So I headed on inside and found myself a raid den. After heading into the raid den, I used my new level 100 Ho-Oh, and it was super OP. I managed to defeat all the raid dens pretty much in like 2 hits. It was pretty crazy. I was looking for some pretty good loot, but unfortunately I didn't get much from these. I then moved on where I managed to find myself a Gible, which is one of the Pokemon I would need to create a fusion later on. I then found myself a Riolu, which I ended up catching. Hey, let's go. I then stumbled across a dark oak forest biome. I needed to find this biome because there was a certain legendary I wanted to get, which was the mythical Pokemon Darkrai. Unfortunately though, he only spawns on certain moons, so I had to wait quite a while for him to spawn. Whilst finding a place for me to live, me and my rival Hawk were traveling around in the ocean biome where we stumbled across the legendary Pokemon Kyogre. It was so lucky that it spawned, as it needs to be in the rain and in a deep ocean, so we got pretty lucky with this one. Luckily though, I eventually caught it in an Ultra Ball. Now that I'd caught the Kyogre, I now had both the Pokemon I needed to create my first fusion Pokemon. Although, since my Blastoise was shiny, I was going to need a shiny Kyogre as well to fuse them together to create a shiny fusion. So I opened a legendary crate where I managed to get a legendary shiny convert. So I pulled out my Kyogre and then I used the shiny convert on him to turn him into a giant pink whale. Now that I had both the Pokemon I needed, I headed to the fusion chamber and combined Blastoise and Kyogre to get Blastogre. He was so cool. And I finally now had my first fusion Pokemon. I then headed up to the move relearner and learned the signature move that every fusion gets at level 100. For Blastogre, it's Vortex Blast. Basically, this is a really cool move with 100 power and 90 accuracy, which is super powerful for a water type like Blastogre. Every single fusion has a custom move as well, meaning that I'm going to find loads of new custom moves throughout this 100 days. I then spent a little bit of time creating my house. I didn't want to show all of this because it's pretty boring and it's just a bunch of tedious building. I spent so many days, I had to defeat so many Pokemon just to get all the materials for this. And I had to buy a bunch, meaning I had to go to the boss tower, grind up a bunch of money just to get all the materials for the house. But I was pretty happy with how it turned out, and I had a nice little home to call my own now. I then headed back to the boss tower where I evolved my Gible into a Gabite, and then also my Riolu into a Lucario. After that, I headed over to the level grinder to get some proper levels and got my Gabite into a Garchomp. Now that I had a full team of level 100s, I decided it would be a cool idea to check out the Warzone. Essentially, how the Warzone works is it's a little custom area that has been built, and all that happens in there is there's a bunch of high-level Pokemon that spawn with a bunch of legendaries that can potentially spawn quite often. Only catch is, when you're in the Warzone, there's a chance for another player to battle you, which is bad. Because if another player battles you in the Warzone, if they defeat you, they get a chance to steal one of your Pokemon. So if you go in with legendaries, you could potentially lose that legendary. So it's a very risky idea. So, I read through all of the rules for the Warzone, just to make sure I wasn't breaking any rules, which you guys should also do too, and then I headed into the Warzone. I then had a Galarian Moltres spawn on me, which is crazy as that was the one I was collecting with my orb, meaning I wouldn't even have to fully do my orb anymore as I had a Galarian Moltres spawn. After catching it though, it was crazy because another Galarian Moltres spawned on me, which was absolutely insane. I could not believe it. After that, now that I had my Lucario and my Galarian Moltres, I headed out of the Warzone and headed over to the Fusion Chambers. I then put my Lucario in and the Galarian Moltres, and I waited for it to fuse together to create Lucatres, which is so cool. Make sure if you guys like the fusions to let me know in the comments what your favorite fusion Pokemon is. I then headed over to the Warp EVs as I wanted to train my Lucatres to be the most powerful version of himself that he could possibly be. So I completed all of his EV training and then headed through to the end to catch my next Pokemon to make a new fusion. This Pokemon was Absol. After I found the Absol, I was pretty happy, although they are pretty common in the end, so it wasn't too difficult for me to find. After catching it though, I headed back and then ended up finding a Mega Boss Absol. Luckily, the power of Blastoga was just too much for it, and I ended up defeating it, getting myself a little bit of money, a Deep Sea Scale, an Absolite, and a Rare Candy. I then also got the choice of a Mega Stone, so I picked the Mega Ring. I then ended up exploring in a river biome looking for a legendary, where I came across a shiny Magikarp. This was absolutely hilarious, but it was also really good because I'd be able to use this Pokemon to potentially make a fusion if I could find a certain legendary. I then headed back to the legendary crate, where I ended up getting myself a specific legendary claim, which meant that I'd be able to get another legendary Pokemon that I'd be able to use as a fusion. I decided to go with Darkrai as he was the hardest Pokemon that I wanted to find to get. So I decided to pick out my Darkrai, and he looked amazing. Shiny Darkrai was insane as he's my favorite mythical Pokemon. I then headed into the birch forest nearby and searched for days looking for a Routes. Eventually though, I finally found the Routes I was looking for, which was the shiny blue Routes. And now that I had it, I had 2 more shiny Pokemon that I could fuse together. So I headed back to the level grinder and evolved my Routes up into a Curlier. After that, I then continued in a level grinder until eventually my Curlier then evolved into a Gardevoir. Now that I had my 2 Pokemon I would need, I headed back to the Fusion Chambers and combined Gardevoir with Darkrai, creating myself the shiny Gardevoir. And boy, did shiny Gardevoir look insane. I was so happy with how it looked. Honestly, this has to be one of my favorite fusion Pokemons. I then ended up just RTBing for a bunch of days, trying to get the correct biome that I needed. But eventually, after just getting all of these rubbish biomes that I did not need, I just headed into the EV training area, as I wanted to get my Gardevoir all EV trained up so that it would have the perfect stats to be as strong as possible. I then headed back to the level grinder as usual and leveled up Gardevoir all the way to level 100. Now that I finally had 3 different fusion Pokemon, we were halfway there to getting an entire team of legendary fusion Pokemon. I was super excited with how cool all 3 of these looked so far. I then found the correct biome I was looking for, which was a Mesa biome. I then explored for a little while and thought I found what I needed, but it ended up just being a Mega Boss Metagross, which is still really cool, and I decided I wanted to try and take it on. Unfortunately though, a lot of my team weren't strong enough to take it, but eventually we managed to whittle it down and defeat the Mega Metagross boss. I then continued exploring for another couple days until eventually I finally found the Pokemon that I was looking for. This was a Bagon. And the reason I wanted this wasn't because it was an original plan of mine to get a fusion of a Bagon, but because I caught the Ho-Oh earlier on in the 100 days that was from a Lucky Block, I decided that I would want to fuse the Ho-Oh too and not waste it. So the only thing I can fuse with a Ho-Oh is a Salamence. So I had to get this Bagon and train him up to evolve into a Salamence. I headed through to the level grinder as it was the fastest way to get my Bagon to evolve up into Salamence. I eventually managed to get my Bagon to evolve into a Shelgon, and then from a Shelgon all the way up into a Salamence. I was super happy now that I had a Salamence because I was able to now fuse it with the Ho-Oh. So as usual, I headed to the fusion machine, I put in Salamence and I put in Ho-Oh. I then entered the fusion key, and I was super happy to now have the 4th member of my team, Sacred Mence. And he looked so cool. I'm so excited to use all these fusions and share them with you guys, because they are amazing. I'm super excited to do more 100 days on this, so that I can show you so many more fusion Pokemon. I then decided to go mining for a little bit, as there was one other Pokemon that I wanted to get, but unfortunately the only way to get it was by mining up a bunch of minerals and then smelting them all up in furnaces with a really small chance that you'll even get the Pokemon to spawn. So I grabbed up as much as I possibly could and then went outside and placed down a bunch of furnaces with loads of coal, loads of iron, loads of copper, and loads of bauxite ore, as I needed to get as much as I possibly could. And as you can see, I filled up so many furnaces. Eventually, after smelting stacks and stacks of iron and aluminium, I finally managed to get the Meltan to spawn. I was so excited that I now had a Meltan. Eventually, I finally managed to catch the Meltan, but then realized that I had to do it all over again. Because in order to evolve a Meltan, you need to smelt 400 ores while it's in your inventory just to get him to evolve. So eventually, I finally managed to evolve my Meltan into a Melmetal. I was super excited now that I had this guy, as he was definitely the hardest one to get so far in this 100 days. I then traveled in the Nether for a little while, until eventually I finally found the Pokemon I wanted to fuse with Melmetal, which was a Marshadow. I absolutely love Marshadow and is one of my favorite Pokemon. Make sure you guys comment down below what your favorite Pokemon is as well. And if you are enjoying the video, make sure to like and hit that sub button. And talking about fusions, I've now headed back to the fusion machine to create my next fusion. So I put in Melmetal and I added Marshadow. I then put the fusion key in to create myself Marshmetal. He looked so cool. I was super happy with this fusion. So I headed back to the EV training area to EV train my Marshmetal as much as I could to make him as good as possible. After completing all of his stats, I then headed back to the level grinder to get my Marshmetal to level 100, getting me my 5th fusion Pokemon for this 100 days. Now that I had 5 fusion Pokemon, I figured I'd be ready to take on some of the gyms. So I headed into the first gym. Luckily, as I had a very powerful fusion team, I managed to defeat this gym pretty easily, getting me my first gym badge. I then headed over to the second gym, and after entering in, luckily I had Gardevoir, which swept the gym, getting me my second gym badge. I then made my way into the third gym and decided to take it on once again. This time it was a little bit more difficult with the dragon Pokemon, but my team took it on pretty well, and once again Gardevoir came through as MVP and destroyed the entire gym, getting me my third gym badge. After heading into the fourth gym, I unfortunately ended up getting defeated, meaning I'd have to wait a couple days before I could head back and challenge the gym. So I headed home, where I ended up encountering a boss Ampharos. This thing was pretty difficult to defeat, as my Pokemon weren't too strong against the Ampharos, but luckily with the power of all of my fusion Pokemon, I managed to take it out pretty quickly. I then headed into quite a large area in a river biome, and decided to cover the entire place with dirt, as there was one Pokemon in particular that I needed to spawn to be my 6th and final fusion. I already had the Absol. All I would need now is the last Pokemon. If you know what it is, make sure you comment down below to tell me what you think the fusion Pokemon is gonna be. After nothing spawned though, I decided that I'd head out a little bit longer and just go and explore for a little while, where I ended up encountering this Beautifly raid den. But luckily Sacred Ments absolutely destroyed it, getting me some pretty good loot in the process. I then headed back over to the river, where I decided to AFK a little bit longer, hoping that the Pokemon would spawn, and luckily, to my surprise, the Keldeo spawned. If any of you commented Keldeo down in the description, well done, because you got it right. After catching the Keldeo, there was 2 fusions I could try and make, but I wanted Absoldio, the Absol and the Keldeo fusion. So I put them both into the fusion machine and created Absoldio. Such a clean fusion. I really love this one. So as usual, I headed over to the level grinder and leveled up Absoldio all the way up to level 100. After that, I headed into the EV area and trained up my Absoldio to have the perfect stats with all of the EV training I had completed. Now that I was done with this, I had a full team of 6 fusion Pokemon, all EV trained and leveled up to level 100. I then decided to have a little battle with my rival Hawk, where I ended up sweeping him with just Blastoga. It was such an easy fight. But my rival wasn't having it, so he decided he wanted another battle. So again, I started with my Blastoga and ended up destroying him once again. These fusion Pokemon were too strong. So I left that battle and headed over to the 4th gym again, trying to defeat the ground gym. But with my newfound Absoldio, I managed to get the edge on the gym leader, defeating it, getting me my 4th gym badge. After that, I headed into the next gym, where I ended up defeating it again, getting me my 5th gym badge. I then just decided to continue defeating the gyms, where I managed to get my next gym badge, which was the Poison Gym badge. I then continued on, where I ended up taking out the Steel Gym as well, with Gardencry absolutely sweeping the team once again. Finally, I had to take on the Thunder Gym, where I ended up defeating the Electric-type Pokemon and getting me my 8th and final gym badge. Now, there was only one more thing for me to do in this 100 days, which was head back to the War Zone. So me and Hawk decided to head into the War Zone, where we had the Ultra Beast Nihilego spawn on us, which was super cool, but unfortunately there wasn't any fusions with it right now, so I decided to catch it just in case I ever did a 200 days, and this might come in handy. My rival Hawk then encountered another player, which ended up battling him, which was super scary. But luckily for me, I wasn't in a battle, and I ended up finding a legendary Reshiram. After catching this, I had a little look and realized there was one more fusion Pokemon that I could create to kickstart the next 200 days if you guys wanted to see it. So now that I caught myself a Reshiram, I headed out and found myself a Savannah biome, which is the biome I was going to need to find myself a Shinx. For this fusion, I wanted to create Luxray and Reshiram. So I caught the Shinx and then headed straight over to the level grinder to level it up to get to a Luxray. First, my Shinx evolved into a Luxio, and then finally a Luxio up into a Luxray. I then headed back over to the fusion chambers and checked out all of the custom fusion Pokemon that I didn't even use in this 100 days. So if you guys want to see me use or create any more of these fusions, make sure to comment down below letting me know if you want a 200 days. So I headed over to the fusion machine and created Reshiram and Luxray, making the legendary fusion Reshiram. This one had to be one of my favorite fusions. It looked so cool, and it was one of the brand new fusions. Shout out to SMASHMC for letting me use all these fusions, and I'll see you guys in the next one.